thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and all the countries and
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. And now, of course, because we're doing the Zoom version of our show, we can be found on Facebook and also on demand at HCC's TV website. I want to thank you all for joining us in last week's show and for your thoughtful comments, ideas, thoughts, and suggestions for guests to be covered on future segments of Dialogue Houston. After all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show now proudly on HCC TV starting its 26th season. We have a lot to cover now with the COVID-19 crisis, and we're going to continue to do so by bringing you guests that can help us address some of the issues we face. Last week, as you know, we had Chris Tomlinson, our wonderful business columnist from the Houston Chronicle, talking about the business community's response and the larger issues involved in that. I wanted to have another great community thought leader on this week. So I reached out to my good friend, Russell Richard, who is the Vice President of Leadership and Engagement at the Center for Houston's Future, but he's also a wonderful author in his own right and thought leader and lecturer around the issue of leadership. He is the author of the wonderful book, Leadership, The View from Here. He also does a weekly podcast from the center with every week featuring a different thought leader around the issue of leadership. So I thought he would be the perfect person to follow Chris because one of Chris's main comments last week was that to have real change, you have to have real leadership. So as I prepared with Russell for today's discussion with you, I kind of see our task as this, Russell. Our task is to put forward a coherent plan for transformational change, compromising where necessary without ever losing sight of our values, principles, and long-term goals. It was in that context I would like to have this following conversation with you because you have thought through this stuff a lot and spent a lot of time with other thought leaders kind of discussing this. So let me say, first of all, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Larry, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's good to see you. And I hope you and all of your loved ones are doing well.
Thank you. I think everyone thus far is doing so. Let's just begin because we have a little time to cover a lot this afternoon. Let me ask this first question, get us started here. Given the COVID-19 pandemic and all the discussions about the crisis, I'd like to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this matter. What are your thoughts from a leadership perspective?
Well, Larry, thank you for the question. Let me first by saying that my heart goes out to all of those who have been impacted by COVID, those who've been sickened by it, who have lost loved ones, who've lost jobs. It's been a tragic situation, but we will get through it, and we will get through it together. You know, I want to measure my remarks about COVID because I think we've reached a point now where people are experiencing COVID fatigue. And I don't want to add to that, but I want to make the point that COVID is a comma and not a period. And what I mean by that is it's a tragedy that we're all dealing with throughout the world, but it's not the end of the world. And we will get through it. We will get through it together. I'm confident that we will have a vaccine. But I think it might be a moment where we could pause and be introspective for a while. And as we come out of COVID-19, we come out better, whatever that means for you as an individual. But not only better as individuals, but better as families, better as communities, better as businesses, better as a government. We only have one path here, and that path is forward. We can't go back to the way things were. So my hope is that we come out on the other side better.
That's a very good response to the question because I think you're right. Hopefully that we will have a new reality going forward that is more inclusive and holistic of all human beings and try to address some of the things that we were not able to address or not willing to address before COVID-19. Let me ask this. There's a lot of conversation about how we move forward as a city, state, county, and the world. Many people are adamant about not going back to the way things were before the crisis, and they're trying to imagine life in the next new normal. What are your thoughts about the next new normal?
Let me just preface what I'm going to say by saying that everything I say today, I say in the spirit of encouragement and optimism. I've also heard some of those same things. People are trying to imagine what the new normal or what the next normal look like. And I'd like to frame it a little differently. I think what we're really talking about here is culture. We're talking about a culture change. And culture is how we live. It's how we do things. It's how things get done. And our culture has shifted. We have seen a massive paradigm shift in our culture and how we live. And I liken it unto the wheel of fortune. And by that I mean we've moved off a position that we were very familiar with. And the wheel is spinning. And none of us really know exactly where we're going to land and what things will be going forward, because the information is changing daily. The wheel is spinning. New things are coming into focus. The wheel continues to spin. And so we don't know exactly where we're going to land. But one thing that I think we are certain about is that things will be different. And different is not necessarily a bad thing. Different, in my view, is an opportunity for us to all start more intelligently and have a path forward that is better than what we've experienced in the past.
Let me pick up your point about different being better as we move through change, and a lot of it will be transformational change. Inherent in that discussion about difference is that we all operate from the same facts. It's interesting right now. We know that we're all entitled to our own opinion, perspective, and viewpoint, but not our own fact. To have that new different be better, to be more positive and going forward for everyone, it has to be fact-based, does it not?
Well, I agree. I absolutely agree. And I appreciate you mentioning earlier this leadership webcast that we're doing at the Center for Houston's Future. It's something that we've been doing for the last several weeks. In fact, we just wrapped up our 7th webcast earlier this week. And what's so great about these webcasts, Larry, is we're able to have experts from different backgrounds. We've had practitioners, we've had academics, we've had politicians, we've had scientists, we've had business people. And all of those people are able to give us a perspective based on facts. Some of the challenges that we face today is there's so much information out there. And there's so much information coming from different sources, and we don't know what to believe or who to trust. And one of the things that I think has been really great about these webcasts is that the people that we're talking to are people that have facts, that they're not your facts or my facts, they're just the facts. And it's great to have the facts in order to make a decision. I think one of the things that is somewhat upsetting to some people is that people don't trust giving us the facts and giving us the truth. And I believe that if we have the facts, then we can make intelligent decisions that we need to make for ourselves, for our families, for our businesses.
That's a good response. I thank you for that. The last time you were on Dialogue Houston, we spent a lot of time discussing leadership. And everything that is happening around COVID-19, leadership is the word going forward. You have written about leadership as a guest columnist and the contributor to Houston Business Journal for the last year or so. What have you and your readers discerned about how people should be leading right now?
Well, I do appreciate you recognizing that work, Larry. It's something that I've really enjoyed over the last year or so, writing these columns about leadership. And we've talked about a number of things that I think are just as relevant today as they were some 8 or 9 months ago. We've talked about and written about things like, how do we lead in an uncertain world? What does true leadership look like? What are some of the characteristics of smart, effective leadership? How do we lead in the best interest of our city, of our people, of our society, of our culture? these are things that we were not only concerned about some 8 or 9 months ago, but things that we're also concerned about right now. But I have to tell you something, Larry. This may come as a surprise to you, but I am really not a student of leadership. I'm a student of wisdom. And if you indulge me for a second, the two are not necessarily synonymous, closely aligned, but not necessarily synonymous. In my personal view, wisdom informs and directs leadership. And without wisdom, it's impossible to have smart, effective leadership. Wisdom, in short, is knowing. It's knowing what to do and what to do next. And leadership, aside from motivating and inspiring people to accomplish a particular task, is also about knowing what tasks need to be accomplished and how to go about accomplishing those tasks. Which is why people who don't know what they're doing, when they attempt to lead, they do and say some of the most ridiculous things, and we're all, impacted by that. And so these columns, I think, have been some thoughts and ideas that I've shared that I think have resonated with a lot of people and will continue to serve us well moving forward. Hey, look, leadership was important before COVID. It's important now, and it will be important later. Leadership is perhaps one of the most important facets in life. And so goes leadership, so goes the enterprise of family, community, business, and government, the pillars of society. Leadership is an existential issue. If we want a healthy family, we look to leadership. We want prosperous business, we look to leadership. We want a strong community, we look to leadership. Effective government, leadership. Leadership is our North Star. It's the difference between good or extraordinary, success, failure, victory, or defeat. And unfortunately, in this COVID environment, it's the difference between life and death. If we fail at leadership, we do so at our own peril. But we won't fail because failure is not an option.
We're going to have to take a pause and break on that in a moment, but let me just respond to one piece you said. I agree with your wonderful explanation there. I think the challenge has always been with leadership, and my especially has been servant leadership and still is. And as I look to the adapting servant transformational leader going forward, one of the things I do know about leadership is that in your part that you describe wisdom and leadership, the challenge has always been to take information and turn that information into education, education into knowledge, knowledge into wisdom, wisdom into action, and do something. Many times we end up having the process following down to the wisdom part, but we're short on the action piece. So wisdom and leadership's highest goal, highest attainable goal, is to constantly put into practice, into action, all those words and all the things that they have learned. Because at the end of the day, don't tell me you love me, just show me you love me. Yeah. In fact, use words only if necessary. And I think the essence of leadership is in the action and the caring and the empathy and the compassion and the things that we say we care about that we've shown to be sometimes in short strife and that we know we're going to have going forward. We'll take a small pause and break on that point. When we come back, we're going to pick up our conversation with Russell. Please stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. If you've been with us for the first part of the show, you know we're having a fascinating conversation with our guest this week is Russell Richard, who is an author in his own right. The title of the book is Leadership, The View from the Top, and from Leadership from Here. And I always say that, you know, when you talk about leadership and you bring in someone who has written extensively on leadership, both in his book and the column that we mentioned earlier in the Houston Business Journal, and he has interesting perspective that he shared with us, if you were with us earlier, about the wisdom and leadership piece. I want to take off on that, Russell, if I could, for a few minutes.
Sure.
Your perspective on leadership and wisdom was, I think, a very interesting one during the before the last break. How are leaders doing today during this crisis?
I think we're all watching the same news and we're all reading the same newspapers and magazines, and I think we can all make our own judgment on how leaders are doing. I think one way to examine and to judge the caliber of leadership is to examine the state of affairs created by that leader. And if what we examine is collaboration, building trust, moving forward collectively, collaboratively, and getting positive results, then I think there you have your answer. If we find the opposite of that, then I think you also have your answer and you have to make your own judgment. But I think we have seen examples of good leadership and we've seen examples of leadership that we question.
Let's talk about that word you mentioned, trust, for a moment. Relationships built on mutual trust and respect has been the hallmark of actually any great leader throughout history. The ability to create, maintain, nurture, and develop trust in a way that allows you to be able to act with and for the human beings that you're serving. And we've taken trust for granted many times without doing the proper work and putting the proper time into developing those relationships of mutual trust and respect. Before COVID-19, the hallmark of that was time spent with another human being. Time spent with another human being, usually in trying to break bread together, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. Tonality, inflections, and voices could be seen and understood. Expressions on people's face could be looked at, and you could develop a relationship that really allowed you to do things. Some of that can still be done remotely and video and et cetera, but not as well. So as we look at this trust factor, trust is going to be the hallmark going forward. Is it not? It's going to be one of those things, one of those commodities. In fact, it may be the most prized commodity going forward to be able to accomplish things and to get things done. Your thoughts?
Two things. Let me unpack this two ways. One, you mentioned trust, and the other thing you mentioned was moving forward. I agree 100% that trust is critical. Let me tell you a quick story. Larry, in the 1930s, there were a group of leaders that met in a hotel in downtown Houston, and they imagined Houston. They imagined Houston as this marquee city. And they put into motion a series of plans that put Houston on a trajectory to become the great city that we all know and love. Now, some would argue that what they did was driven by enlightened self-interest, but the bigger point is they imagined Houston's future. They took action and they provided leadership. We today have an opportunity to build a new Houston. We're much better than those leaders of the 30s. We're more diverse, more inclusive, more in step with contemporary times, and more driven by the conviction to make things better for all people and not just select groups of people. We now stand on the arc of time at the door of a new era with an opportunity to build our new future. This is our moment. We are the leaders that we've been waiting for. That will include and require trust and require a collaborative working environment in order for us to meet all of the goals and ideals and expectations that we hope for the future.
For such a time as this, leaders usually rise to the occasion. They come from many, many places, many sources, many backgrounds, many races, ethnicities, many educational perspectives. And here's what I know and you know to be true too, particularly in that last description of the group that used to meet in the AF suite 8F suite at the Rice Hotel, that group of leaders you were referenced to, who were all European American males, who were titans of business community, titans of our community at the time. Today's group will look nothing like that group did going forward. The challenge has always been when you get that diversity of group around the table, the inclusiveness of the voices being heard around the table. The challenge has always been that all voices be accepted and listened to equally around the table. We fought many battles over the years to get a seat at the table. The question has never been going forward the seat at the table. The question is, are all voices at the table respected and listened to equally? That's going to be paramount going forward. Because as you mentioned, that new reality that we're going to have to create together is going to have to be an inclusive, holistic reality that takes in the concerns of all human beings at all stratas and levels of life in our community for it to be successful. And I think that leads me to my last question for you, because I think it fits so well. The next new normal. Give us quickly just your little vision of what you think that may look like.
Let me say this, the Houston that we enjoyed prior to COVID-19 was created by leaders of the past. The future that we create after COVID-19 will be created by us. And that new future, that new normal can be as bright and remarkable as we imagine it. But it's going to require three things. It's going to require us selecting a higher caliber of leaders, our own ability to lead, and our willingness to train those that follows. As I mentioned earlier, this is our moment. We can't predict the future, but we can imagine it. We can influence it, and we can build it. There's no going back. There's only one path, and that path is forward to the future. And the only way to get to the future is together.
Well, Russell, I cannot thank you enough for being our guest here on Dialogue Houston. We're going to continue this dialogue with you and other thought leaders around our community. We'll probably engage you in the center and some of the people you've had on your podcast on leadership to be on this show also, because some of the people you've had on, I think they only began to lay out their perspective. I'm going to give them more time maybe to lay it out a little in broader detail. But as always, I thank you for being part of the thoughtfulness of this community, of the leadership of this community, and trying to help us all position ourselves going forward. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Larry. It's been great being with you.
All right, let me close with this little reflection, if I may. As we continue to gain, live, and grow daily in new knowledge, this I already know about the next new normal. The next new normal, for me, comes from a place of personal experience about what I'm about to mention at this point. I've been working for some of the great and non-great leaders in this community for almost soon to be 50 years in the public, private, nonprofit, religious, and educational sectors of Houston. I know that going forward, the adapting servant transformational leader of the next new normal will need to be deeply involved with the political structures of our times. Why? COVID-19 has clearly shown that it is the political structures, i.e. public policies, that determine who shall be rich, who shall be poor, who shall be free, who shall be oppressed, who shall live, and who shall die. Going forward, it must be about the common good for our collective future together. The challenge and opportunity for leadership in the next new normal and the ones that will follow is to define, defend, and consistently execute the common good. Leadership going forward will be more about empathizing with people, connecting with people, and empowering people. What human being is your client, your customer, your constituent, or your congregant? The broader betterment of society, not for some, but for all, must become a reality. That is where I think we're headed. That is where I know we need to be headed. And I know that the proper adapting servant transformational leadership can help us get there. So as we continue to discern together what the next new normal will be, let's show everyone a little COVID-19 love. Wear your mask, wear your face mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, and remember why you're wearing the mask. I wear my mask. I wear my mask not for me, but for my neighbor, for the other. Let me say that again. Why I wear my mask. I do not wear my mask for me, but for my neighbor, for the others around me, other human beings whose lives I care about as much as I care about mine. That compassion, that empathy, that common humanity that we must have going forward. This pandemic has shown the disparities, the inequities so greatly across this country, across this state, across this city even. We know what needs to be done. We know how it needs to be done. We know for whom it needs to be done. We know where and what sectors it needs to be done. Let us all rise to the occasion and make sure that that happens going forward in the next phase of the next new normal and the ones that will follow it. So join us in the coming weeks here on Dialogue Houston as we bring you thoughtful human beings to reflect on these issues together. Again, let me thank Russell for being on this show this week. And until next time we come together, be safe, be well, peace, power, and love.